Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Joining Michael on the show today is Eisha Armstrong, who's the co-founder and executive chairman of Victeris, a company focusing on transforming B2B services into products. She has over 25 years experience, particularly in launching data and information service businesses. She is known for advising executives on fostering cultures that encourage product innovation. She is the author of several books, including Fearless and famously Productize, the ultimate guide to turning professional services into products. She is also a professional speaker who has contributed to various publications. But before we jump into today's episode, are you ready to grow and take your consulting business to the next level? Many of the clients we work with started as podcast listeners just like you. And a consistent theme they have shared with us is they had wished they had reached out sooner about our Clarity coaching program rather than waiting for that perfect time. If you're interested in learning more about how we help consultants just like you, we are offering a free, no-pressure growth session call, where on the call, we will dive deep into your goals, challenges, and situation, and outline a plan that is tailor-made just for you. We will also help you identify where you may be making costly and time-consuming mistakes to ensure you're benefiting from proven methods and strategies to grow your consulting business. Don't wait years to find clarity. If you're committed and serious about reaching a new level of success in your consulting business, go ahead and schedule your free growth session call today. Just visit consultingsuccess.com/grow to book your free call today. Okay, so now let me tell you about what you're going to learn in today's episode with Eisha. First is how to productize your services to make your company more valuable, how to shift your culture to embrace a product mindset, how to ensure there is a viable market for your product idea, and how to boost profits by specializing in a specific niche, plus so much more. Here to share with you her insight and story is Eisha Armstrong. Enjoy.
Eisha, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation and enjoyed our little conversation before hitting the record button. So this is going to be fun. Why don't we start off having you share a little bit more of what were you doing before you co-founded Victeris?
Sure. So I spent 20 years of my career in product development, management, and leadership roles at first a B2B information services company called Corporate Executive Board, or CEB. It was acquired by Gartner in 2015. Mm-hmm. And then I spent 3 years in a product leadership role at the media company Scripps, creating digital data products for advertisers. So always on the product side, always B2B, but two different industries, very different industries.
So you obviously decided not only to continue working in two different roles where you're involved in product innovation and also kind of this idea of building products and productized services, which is more what you specialize in now or focus in on now. But you carry that into the current business, which is really all about productization and helping companies, right, to develop productized services and offerings. What about that gets you so excited? I mean, there's likely could have gone into many different kind of paths or taken a different focus in terms of what your business is about today. What is it about products? What is it about productization that you just really kind of vibe with or enjoy?
Yeah, I think it's two things, Michael. So the first one is I love to create. And then a negative way of characterizing that is I get bored easily. So the innovation side, especially when you're creating a new product, a new solution, or even a new feature, it really lights me up. So I always knew I wanted to stay in a place where I was able to create often and wouldn't just be managing something into perpetuity. And then the second thing is the business angle of product management, product innovation, what we call productization at our firm, which is trying to understand where are market opportunities, where is there white space in the market, and then how can a organization bring their existing assets to win in that white space. And I love that complexity of that, creating a strategy and figuring out a solution and then creating something and then moving on to the next thing, because I will get bored. Yeah.
Right. And then can you share with your company, who are the main types of clients that you're working with? Kind of when you think about the ideal client, how you describe them?
Yeah. So our ideal client profile is a B2B services company. So that could be a law firm, an accounting firm, a consulting firm, ad agency. We've got a bunch of engineering and architecture firms that we're working with right now, IT services, but organizations that have historically made their money by selling time or expertise rather than selling a product. So services native, not product native. They tend to be lower on technology maturity, and they want to tech enable the delivery of what they're doing. They want to create products to be sold alongside their services, and we help them do that.
And is there a typical size of organization that you tend to focus on? For example, you mentioned an ad agency. Is it a certain, like, do they need to have typically 50 employees or 500 employees, or what does that look like in terms of the real focus?
Yeah. So, I mean, where we're prospecting and targeting is mid-market up to large enterprise. So we have clients that are $1 billion in revenue. They could be services arms of larger companies.
Sure.
And then we'll work all the way down to probably 50 employees. But we have worked with smaller organizations. The caveat is that in order to be successful in the strategy of productization, you have to be willing to invest and really dedicate like a full-time employee to its success. So it's very difficult to do off the side of one's desk or with minimal investment. And so that kind of naturally will crowd out a lot of people at the smaller end.
That makes sense. I definitely want to spend a bit of time diving deeper into productization, getting some of your kind of good best practices around that, what consultants need to look out. Before we do that though, if we could just get a better picture of the company today, size, how many employees or team members, what's maybe an average project value, annual revenue, just anything that you can share to kind of help people get a sense of where you're at today.
Yeah. So we've got a dozen employees. About half of us are in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where my co-founder and I live. And then the other half are distributed, including we have a digital nomad who moves somewhere else every quarter. I love her life. So that's where we are in size. We have two revenue streams. So one is traditional consulting. We will work with a client, we'll create the market, the strategy for them, we'll design the product, we'll help them figure out the go-to-market. That's kind of classical consulting services. And those are usually high 5 figures, low 6 figures. Then we also we've drunk our own champagne and created our own Productize service, which is we'll teach you how to do it for yourself program. So our customers there go through a series of accelerators to teach them a new product innovation process. They get coaching, they get peer groups, data information, and then that's sold on a subscription basis. And that's, depending on company size, can be as little as low 5 figures all the way up to high 5 figures, depending on how many license holders they have for the solution.
How does both those kind of two service offerings, what is the revenue kind of attribution to each, or the share of your total revenue? Is it 50-50 or is one the majority? Kind of what does that look like today?
Yeah. So we started 5.5 years ago just doing strictly consulting. So we could learn the market, test our hypotheses. Our product went into beta in 2021 when our first book came out. And so it was like less than 5% of revenue that year. And then it's consistently grown. For 2023, we ended at 40% kind of productized service revenue and then 60% consulting. We want to continue to grow the size of the slice of the pie that is productized services.
Yeah. And where do you see, like, is the goal to get that to 100% or 90%, or kind of how do you think about the future of where you want to take that?
Yeah, I think the larger the better from a valuation standpoint, but also from a employee engagement standpoint. So nobody at our company came from consulting. In fact, most of us used to work for the same company that I did, Corporate Executive Board, CEB. So we all came from a productized services background and never wanted to do classic, bespoke, customized services as our profession. So the strategy has always been to migrate away from that to more productized services. I think what we're coming up against is we're self-funded. So it's just Nicole and I, two funders. Obviously, the cash flow from the consulting is what's been funding the investment in product. And that means that there's a limit, right, on how quickly we can change that mix. Also, there's an opportunity too, which is most of our customers on the productized services side, the goal is to be working with them for many years as they go through this transformation on their own. It's a multi-year journey. And so across that time, you see a lot of cross-sell opportunity for consulting. So it's a debate we're still having. I think we naively said probably 12 months ago, we think that we can go to zero consulting. I don't know if that's true anymore.
Right. So you talked about making investments and funding the development, right, of the productized offer, really just through cash flow profits of the business. What are those investments? When you talk about like investing in the productized offer or building that out, could you just share a few examples of like, what does that look like? Are you, is it going towards a designer? Is it going to like an instructional designer of courseware? Like walk us through what those investments might look like.
Yeah. So the first one was codifying the intellectual property. So the process that we used, what we had learned in working with all of our clients, and that first was codified in the 2 books that we've written. So that was my time and a little bit of a researcher, ghostwriter, then instructional designer to create the learning experiences in a way that used adult learning best practices. There's also a data component to our subscription product because there's an assessment and then there's ongoing benchmarking that happens. So for that, we had to hire a data scientist on a contract basis, as well as make some software technology investments. We're making a bigger technology investment now because especially on the lower end of the market, kind of those lower 5-figure products that we offer, those are more self-service. So we just rolled out our first version of our platform so people can self-serve, access the learning, the content, the benchmarking data themselves without needing a person to do it for them. So it's been a mix of that research, that writing, that instructional design, the data science, the technology, and then ongoing IP creation as well.
A lot of questions around this, but one is when you think about that position, so you have a business that is growing, there's 12 people. Historically, right, the revenue and profits were coming through the consulting work. Over the last 3 years or so, you've sold more productized offering each year, up to about 40%. You're taking money from consulting work, right, to fund that. What's the conversation in your mind and maybe with your partner, Nicole, like as you both talked about shifting away from something that is lucrative, being consulting, to developing and venturing into something that early on, right, was only sucking money, not necessarily creating money. How did you all think about that? Because for some people, that might be a bit of a challenging position to be in because you're giving up kind of short-term cash flow and revenue for longer-term potential growth. So what did that look like, that conversation?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Michael. It's one that we have to talk to our clients about all the time if we don't think that they're making adequate investment in productization to be successful. So it's nice that we have personal experience with it, perhaps on a smaller scale. But I think we got lucky. So we got lucky in a couple ways. So the first one is that Nicole and I have always had a shared vision for where we wanted to take the business and how we didn't want to create a consulting business where we were selling time for money. And we even kind of mapped out very early on using EOS as our tool, what that 10-year journey might look like to change the mix of revenue and how we might grow the business. And we've come back to that every quarter, again, using the EOS process. And so that's the first thing, is that we shared that vision, we mapped it out, we keep coming back to it. I think the second thing that's been really helpful is that we haven't had the lifestyle needs where we have to take distributions out of the business. So because we both also have partners who work full time. We're not the only ones in our households who are on the hook for paying the mortgage and the kids' school tuition and all of that. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility. I mean, you're so right. Like, I could have been taking some really crazy vacations the last few years if I was taking big fat distributions out of the business instead of plowing it all back in. But I have the flexibility not to do that. Plus, I've designed my life in a way where I'm not relying on that money in order to fund my family's lifestyle. And again, we're both in the same situation, so that helps.
Right. You mentioned earlier that you made the decision to not, or essentially to, continue to invest in the growth of the Productize offer, but that you only have so much that you can invest, right? Have you ever thought about bringing in an investor or taking on debt or bringing in another partner just to accelerate what's already, anything you can talk about there? I'm just wondering if that's something that you've considered.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So when the first book came out, we started getting unsolicited offers, both questions around, are you interested in selling the business? And also, are you interested in an outside investor? And at the time, the answer was no, absolutely not. Like, we're doing great. Like, the book was flying off the shelves. Like, we don't need your money, go away. And then we got to the point where we had to start making larger investments, not just the technology investments, but also how you go to market with a product is very different than how you go to market with a service. So we had to chose to hire a chief growth officer who had a background in B2B SaaS. And that was a very significant investment. And again, it's like, wow, this is starting to pinch. How could we go faster, farther, or farther, faster if we had an outside investor? And we had someone at the time who had a lot of experience in our domain who was willing to write us a 7-figure check. The problem is, Michael, the strings that are associated with that. And again, Nicole and I had a shared vision for what we wanted the company to be. And part of that shared vision wasn't just productizing ourselves. Part of that shared vision was being masters of our own domain and not having to answer to other people other than our clients and our employees. And yes, we could go further, faster if we had more capital, but at what cost to my psychological well-being? What cost to the balance that I've created in my life? At what cost to my employees and kind of the value proposition that I've given them for coming to work with me? So it just, every time we've looked at it, we've looked at this multiple times, it just doesn't make sense because of what the investor expectations might be. Now, could we do a lot more work and maybe find the investor whose values and investment thesis aligns perfectly with ours? Maybe, but then that's a risk, right? That their needs may change. And so it hasn't been worth it right now.
Feel free to say no to answering this question, but I wonder, have you also considered debt or line of credit or any other kind of creative funding sources so that you don't, any thoughts on that or experiences with that?
Yes. And we do have both.
Okay.
So we have a decent line of credit from our bank. And then we also have an SBA loan that's just sitting in a money market account right now as like additional cushion. And it's given us the confidence to, when things feel a little risky or tight, to go ahead and make that leap. So yeah, we've used both debt and line of credit.
Okay. You talked about one of the benefits of adding a subscription productized offer, right, to the business model. You mentioned one is valuation, right? So for those that might be wondering, that companies that have recurring revenue or subscriptions or more productized, especially on the kind of recurring revenue side, can sell at a much higher multiple. Aside from that, are there other reasons that you feel having a productized model or offering is really beneficial for you specifically? And we'll talk more generally about just other consulting firms in a moment, but for you and your firm, the decision to do that, what else was kind of at play or on your mind when you made that decision or continue to invest into it?
Yeah, so it's a lot easier to grow because you don't have to add expert consultants at the same rate that you're growing revenue.
Just explain that. So for those that maybe aren't as familiar with that, why is that the case that with a productized offer, you don't need to have as many senior people or in many cases, even as many people in general to grow?
Yeah, because so when something is productized, you're doing the same thing over and over again. So rather than having something highly custom, like I said before, bespoke, very one-to-one, you're taking something, you're creating it once and you're selling it multiple times. So it could be something as simple as a book, right? A book is a product, could be a training course. It could be a data as a service, learning as a service. It could be software. It could be kind of what we've done where we still have educators involved and coaches involved. So there's a human element, but the humans delivering it don't have to be maybe as strong in their expertise as they would if everything was bespoke and custom, because they're following a playbook. It can be sold by a professional sales force. So it doesn't have to be sold by the same person that's delivering it, because you're selling the product, you're not selling the person or their expertise. So those are a lot of reasons why it's just easier to grow. Yeah.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
I'm with you on that. I mean, everything you're saying I completely agree. We also have a productized service as part of our business.
Do. Yes.
We have for many years. So, I guess over a decade now. So we're big believers in this. And I do want us to explore and get your thoughts, perspective, and opinion on how this can apply to other consulting firms. Before I do that, though, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because you talked about, you wrote these books, and I think you said after the first one, it's flying off the shelves. People want to acquire you, or at least there's interest, and you're getting inbound inquiries. Our listeners and those joining us are probably going, well, like, how do you do that, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who have written books and don't necessarily see that level of interest or inquiries come in. Is there anything that you can identify or that you saw that you believe created the book to fly off the shelves and to have people inquiring in terms of how you marketed it, promoted it, or just anything that you did with that?
Yeah, really good question. So the first thing is, when I was writing the book, I had to make a decision about, was I going to write about productization or product innovation for everyone? Or was I just going to write about B2B services? And really, all of our clients to date had been B2B services. All of what we were marketing was B2B services. All the benchmarking data was B2B. So what held me back from easily making what should have been an easy decision was fear that I was narrowing my niche, right? Because there's this if I make it for everybody, then it will sell more. Well, the opposite is true. So by making the decision to be this is written for leaders, B2B services firms, it says on the cover, Ultimate Guide to Turning Professional Services, into scalable products, right? And that was another thing. Are we going to put it on the cover of the book and the title? Because then not as many people will buy it. That's not true.
Right.
So I think because I was very clear on who the audience was, it was easier for people to buy and helped it stand out from all the other books out there on product management and innovation and blah, blah, blah.
But is there anything that you did with that? So I understand that you were very intentional, right, on who the reader should be and who's going to get the most value from the book. But how did you actually get it into the hands of those leaders? Of course, they go to bookstores and they look around from time to time, but that's not going to necessarily hit as many of those people that you would like. What did you all do to actually get this in the hands of those people?
Yeah, so probably three things. One is heavily marketed it to our existing list. So we already had a pretty strong newsletter list.
Can you give us a sense of how many people on that list at that time?
Maybe 2,500. So not huge, but
right.
For a boutique consulting firm, pretty decent. And then my partner and I probably between the two of us had maybe 4,000 LinkedIn followers each. So tried to squeeze as much juice out of that as we could. We created what's called a street team. So we had people sign up, and a lot of them were former colleagues and friends and clients and things like that, but to sign up to promote it on their LinkedIn and social media. And we gave them all the artwork and language and things like that to use. So we probably had about 50 plus people on the street team for the first book.
And was there anything that they were getting, like any compensation or benefits or swag, or they're just doing it because they like you? Yeah, well, that's a great thing. Okay.
And again, I think it also gets to like the point in time when Nicole and I launched the business. We were both in our 40s. So we had 20 years of work experience and networks each that we could capitalize on. So that, I think, came into play. You know, people who already know, like, and trust because they had worked with us makes it easier to be like, yeah, I'll be on your street team. And then the third thing was Amazon ads. So we spent a significant amount of money advertising the book on Amazon and plowing almost 100% of our royalties back into that. So that was, I think, and continues to be a critical way that people hear about it because it's a sponsored, it shows up as a sponsored book, or you might like this book. And we pay a professional to manage that for us because the Amazon algorithm is always changing. New books are coming out that we might want to advertise against. So it's a very dynamic advertising process. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. Let's shift then to the actual productization and about how you built the business. So I know you mentioned you and a bunch of your team have come from the conference board organization before. But when you started the business, where did your first clients, 2-3 clients come from?
They were all former colleagues. So,
okay. So again, do you just reach out to them and say, hey, I've left this, I'm launching this? Like, how did you remember what you actually said or did to get those conversations going?
Yeah. So Nicole and I had been on a 2-year journey to launch something, anything together, right? And we had a couple of different ideas of what we were going to do and how we might be able to launch the company of our dreams. And so the first summer of 2018, we actually went out and just interviewed a bunch of people and interviewed business executives, interviewed former colleagues. We're like, hey, you know us, we do good work. We're thinking about starting we've left our day jobs, we're starting our own company. We're thinking of focusing in 3 different areas. We'd love to get your feedback. So those conversations were invaluable because that's where we got the advice to focus first on mid-market companies, not small business and not large enterprise and not startups. So that was great. And it also really started to confirm our hypothesis that more B2B services companies were trying to productize and didn't know how to do it. And so all of our first clients came from those conversations.
Can I just...
They were positioned as,
For 1 second, sorry to jump in. You mentioned something that I think people are going to probably want to hear a little bit more about. You know, you said that you got really great advice when you're launching the business, not to go for the large companies, not to go for the startups or small businesses, but to really target the middle market. Why did you get that advice? Why do you feel that was important for you specifically in your company to target middle market and all those other 2?
Yeah. So the advice was large enterprise. As I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, the sales cycle can be really long. And when you're just starting, you need to get quick wins. You need to get those first case studies quickly. You need to get money coming in the door. So that was part of it. And it's just easier to get to the decision maker. Usually you can talk to the CEO or the COO. They can make the decision. It's just much faster. But the advice to stay away from startup, I think, was also important because we were thinking like product innovation, creating your product management function. Like a lot of startup companies, especially post Series A, need help with that. And they hire fractional chief product officers and product coaches to do that. But the problem is that they have a hard time paying their bills. They run out of money, they don't have a lot of budget, right? So even though there was a need there, the willingness to pay and ability to pay was lower. So that's why it was really good advice.
That makes a lot of sense. And then, so if we now fast forward, let's say to today, how are you generating leads? How are you building the pipeline? I know you've already talked about the book, so that clearly has been a good one. What else would you say is working really well for you to, aside from referrals, although you can mention referrals if that's one, but is there anything else that you're doing, just those 2, the book and referrals, for those that are just listening and joining us on audio only, go to YouTube and you can check out the podcast. You can see we got some faces and we're doing some hand signs to each other, but okay. So just go ahead and Eisha, explain that.
Yeah. So the book, 2 books now that we've written, Productize, and then a second one, Fearless, about culture change. They both direct people to a website where we capture leads, and then referrals. Now, I will say it's not just those two because we do have a pretty active social media, but that's all organic. We're not doing any paid LinkedIn ads. We don't do cold outreach. I mean, every 12 months, we're like, we should do cold outreach. And then try it for a month. We're like, that doesn't work. Maybe we need to try it for more than a month. But
yeah, probably.
But what we're doing right now is working.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Okay, so we talked about, we already touched on the benefits of productization. What would you say are maybe some of the downsides? Like if somebody's evaluating, should I look to productize? What would be your recommendation advice when somebody maybe shouldn't productize?
Yeah. So the first thing is new products have a very high failure rate. Depending on the research that you look at, it's somewhere between 40 to like 90%, whether it's like a B2B or a B2C product. And that's because you really don't know how something is going to do until it's in market. You can do all the market research, but like you really don't know until the buyer is faced with that buying decision and then starts to use it and then sees, does this really solve my problem or not? So you have to be willing to fail and to have some money not result in anything other than what we call learning. So that's, I think, very important that failure is going to be a part of this process. And that means that the investment required probably has to be bigger than what you initially thought. If new products had a 100% success rate, then your investment would need to be lower because you would just have to invest however much until you started to get a return on that investment. But you've got to account for failure. So that's the first thing. And then the second one is that this is for B2B services companies, this is a very significant behavior and culture change because I'm going from like Eisha Armstrong creates value through my expertise to like, no, it's this product that creates expertise. And like I mentioned earlier, that's a different way of selling. It's a different way of compensating people. It may not be motivating to a lot of people that you already have on your team. And the idea of being comfortable with failure may be something that most people are really uncomfortable with. So that put on top of this, all the change that's required. And again, this isn't just about innovation. For productization to be successful, usually changing your business model, like how you make money. You're doing digital transformation. I mean, all these things that are expensive, wrought with failure, and require people to change, which people don't like to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. Everything you just shared, I'm a very big believer in, and especially that first part of like before rushing to launch a productized offer just because you hear that's what's popular to do these days or that it increases the value of your company. You need to test, like you need to be actually doing the work to know what you can or is worthwhile to productize and what maybe isn't. So I think that's really great advice. What would you say is the most expensive productized offer you've ever seen? And I ask that because sometimes people have this idea like productization is for selling online courses or something that's not that expensive. You make money while you sleep. And obviously that's very different from the reality, especially when you're selling to organizations. But just from your own experience, whether it's an offer that you yourself have launched, or maybe you help one of your clients launch, or maybe something that you've seen in the marketplace, what stands out as maybe being like the most expensive productized offer?
Yeah, so anything that's software with custom coding, because you're talking about 7 figures. And I have had multiple CEOs. In fact, one just told me at the end of last week, I spent 7 figures building something that nobody wanted.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And it's just like, oh, did you talk to anyone? Did you do any MVP? All the lean startup, lean product design thinking principles. Like, did you use any of these? No, because they were either copying what somebody else had done, or they had 1 or 2 clients ask for something. And so they just assumed that the rest of the market would want it. And then they spent all this money.
Would you call that though a productized offer though? Like the software company, let's say, or whoever developed it, would that have been a productized offer that they made to that CEO or to that company? Or was that more of a custom offer in that scenario, do you think?
Well, so usually it's like building a platform, right? So we're going to build a platform and our clients can like access this data and it's a workflow tool and they can blah, 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 blah. There's some algorithm that's embedded in it. And they can use it to schedule or right?
Right.
Gen AI, right? We're going to, and it's just like, okay, these are great ideas. let's go test them before we write a 7-figure check to a dev shop to build it for us. And unfortunately, we get brought in far too often. And the problem that our client is trying to solve is, I built this product, nobody will buy it. Will you help me figure out how I change my messaging in the market? And it's like, changing your messaging is not going to help. You shouldn't have built this product in the first place. Let's teach you how to de-risk new product investment choices so that this doesn't happen again.
So we just talked about a challenge that a CEO shared with you. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe what's one big challenge that you've faced or the company has faced in the last year?
Oh gosh, where should I start? I mean, you name it, we've made the mistake. So mishires, right? You think somebody has the right expertise and it turns out they really don't. Or wrong fit because they don't move at the pace that you need when you're creating a new product, which is you have to learn and iterate quickly. So you need people who have a bias toward action and can move quickly. So I would put that all kind of in the mishire bucket. I think as much as we preach to our clients, you've got to get market feedback. We are definitely guilty of launching features without knowing if somebody really wants them or needs them. But just because we've seen a competitor have the same thing, or we saw it in a former life, we've definitely made that mistake. What are some other mistakes that we've made in the last 12 months? Oh, here's one. So when you go from services to products, you change the way your revenue, you both recognize revenue and also perhaps when cash comes in the door. So usually with a 12-week consulting project, you're getting a lot of money in a 12-week time period, maybe a third, or 2/3, 1/3, something like that. But if you're selling a subscription-based product and the client has asked for monthly or even quarterly invoicing, you've got something that's at a lower price point, and now the revenue is spread out across a longer period of time. So it can create a cash squeeze, which again is why that line of credit debt that we took on that we parked in a money market has been really helpful.
Yeah, great things to point out for people to give thought to or prepare right in advance as they look at that. I'd love to, before we wrap up, two questions. One is, I mean, you've talked throughout on the importance of feedback, right, and getting validation, whether it's early stage before you even launch the business or as part of your process with clients right now before they build products, right, to really have those conversations. For somebody that might be a little bit earlier stage in their business, or maybe they're just earlier stage in their marketing, even if they've been consulting for some time, but they're looking to make changes, let's say, to their messaging or to their pricing strategy or to their offers, they want to build something. What advice would you give them on how to go to the market to get that feedback? And the one kind of caveat there is, what if they don't feel like they have a really strong network? So they don't have like the 20 years of experience that you have, or maybe it's just been, they've moved countries. So let's put a challenge in there. What advice would you offer to them if they need to go out and actually reach executives or potential future buyers to get that feedback? How might they see the best results in going to those people?
Yeah. So the thing I always like to emphasize, whether I know the person or I don't, is to make sure that they know I want to have a non-commercial conversation, that I'm doing market research, that I'm trying to make a decision as a business owner where to focus, where to invest. And I would really value their feedback.
Do you use that language, like those specific words in terms of...
Non-commercial conversation is always language that I use. And we encourage our clients to use it because it just kind of like opens people up, right? And it's like, I want your advice. Like, I want your advice. I don't want to try to sell you something. Now, you may decide through the course of the conversation, this is something you really would love. That'd be great. But this is a non-commercial conversation to help me make a business decision. And I've found that works very well.
Yeah. Do you talk much about, or do you bring into that email or message you're putting out any research that you've done, like homework that you've done on them and like why you're reaching out to them specifically? Or is it, you don't have to go that personalized? What do you find there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, this is an area where I have less experience because I did come in with such a strong network. And when we are working with clients who need to go talk to prospects, we're usually using a panel building service who's paying them to talk to us. But certainly based on anecdotal experience here and there, always saying why you're reaching out to the person. So what is it about their role, their background, their company? I would imagine would help. But I think more important is that this is a chance to get their advice and also a chance for them to influence where you go, right? So your advice will really help me shape what this looks like. And people love to be part of the creation and the design process. And I think we underestimate how generous people are willing to be if you're asking them to help you build something.
Yeah, great advice. You talked about your 2 books, which we will link up in the show notes and make sure that people can learn more about them. Aside from your books, what's one book that you've read or listened to in the last 6 months? Could be fiction or nonfiction, just something that you really enjoy that you think others might as well.
Yeah, so I read Eric Larson's The Splendid and the Vile about Winston Churchill. So not business related at all, but leadership related. It was about the first year that Winston Churchill was prime minister, and where it was really every day they thought that Germany was going to invade Great Britain. And just obviously the wonderful leadership lessons from Winston Churchill, but also the amount of uncertainty that they were living through on a day-to-day basis is just really mind-blowing. And I found it to be very inspirational. I'm always looking for blueprints for good leadership lessons, and I thought that was a good one.
Yeah, love it. Great stuff. We will also add that to the show notes. Eisha, thank you again so much for coming on. I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and your company and everything that you have going on. What's the one place, the website for them to go and check out?
So Vectorous.com is the company, and then LinkedIn for me. Eisha Tierney Armstrong is my LinkedIn. And I reply to every LinkedIn message I get. So feel free to DM me.
All right. We will have all that there. Again, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, so my pleasure. And this was a great conversation. Thank you, Michael.
And there you have it for today's episode between Michael and Eisha. If you enjoyed today's podcast, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to help support the Consulting Success Podcast, I'd encourage you to share this episode out with a friend or colleague. Also, a quick reminder to book your free growth session call. Head over to consultingsuccess.com/grow. Also, if you want to check out the show notes page for Eisha's episode, you can find that over at consultingsuccess.com. That's the end of the line for us this week. We're going to be back next week with another episode. Until next time.